Great. Thank you so much. And really wonderful to be back with you. I trust everybody can see the screen okay. Thank you. I think like James, how he sort of pinpointed himself culturally and reference wise with his mullet and red shirt and gold chain. I'm pinpointing myself in terms of cultural references back to the Future, which was a formative movie and set of movies during my childhood and youth. So I can tell you all, I did not ever have a mullet, and I know that may surprise you because I don't have any hair at the moment. I did used to have long hair, but I never sported the mullet like James did. It's great to be back with you, and really, what I want to do today is as Anne-Marie was just saying, or Anna, excuse me, was just saying that just want us to think of returning back to our sort of large class environments. We've done an incredible job over the last 15 months, and certainly I think there's an opportunity for us to do some learning. And I just want to reflect on what we've learned and maybe what the future looks like. But before I do that, I also want to offer a land acknowledgement in Canada as well. We have a long-standing history of Indigenous peoples and a particular long-standing history of persecuting our Indigenous peoples. And really in the last couple of weeks, there's been a number of revelations that I know have hit the international media around the discovery of unmarked graves. It started with 251 children, unmarked graves of children from the residential schools. Just yesterday, there was an announcement of 751 unmarked graves associated with another residential school. And I really, I think it underscores the importance of acknowledging that we are existing and working on unceded territory of our Indigenous peoples in Canada, and that we have a long road ahead of us towards reconciliation and working to overcome some of the really horrific injustices of the past. And so just want to note here that Carleton is located on the unceded territory of the Algonquin people. Here you see a picture of Carleton University in amidst Ottawa. It's a beautiful city and has a beautiful history with and a beautiful culture of Indigenous people. So I just want to start with a land acknowledgement on that score. I also just want to sort of orient myself a little bit for you in terms of my own journey in large classes. I've really I've been fortunate to be involved in higher education in 3 distinct spaces, all dealing with large classes. But I really cut my teeth and started to figure them out when I was based at Wits University in South Africa, which is in Johannesburg, where I started out my career as an academic. I was thrown into a classroom of 500 students. In my first year, I failed spectacularly at addressing and treating a large class appropriately, but that failure motivated me to think more clearly and coherently about the opportunity and potential of large classes, and to reorient some of my pedagogical strategies, of which I'm forever grateful. I had then the chance to go and apply that practice after 10 years in South Africa at University College London in the UK, where large classes are a lot smaller than I would say they are in the UK. And certainly in relation to some of the large classes that I heard being described in our lightning talks just now, we're talking under 100 students. But still, I think some of the general principles remain. And of course, now I'm at Carleton University, located in the capital of Canada in Ottawa, Ontario. And I've been here now for 2.5 years, and I've had the privilege of playing the role of the Associate Vice President for Teaching and Learning, which allows me to have a broad institutional perspective across all the disciplines. And large classes are something that we talk a lot about at Carleton, as I'm sure it is the same for all of you. So I really just want to start off my talk, though, with a big congratulations to all of you. A big congratulations for this wonderful gathering and for sharing your experiences and your thoughts and your research, but also just a big congratulations for having made it through 15 months of a global pandemic. I mean, what absolute mayhem, what a complete and utter gong show, but we've all made the best of it. And I have to say that, the higher education sector is going to come through stronger as a result, despite some of the really significant challenges. And just the reflections that I was listening to this morning after James's keynote, but then through the lightning talks just now, it sounds like there's been some really important learning and some really important work that's taken place. So thank you, and a big congratulations to all of you. I want to start though with just reinforcing and reorienting why we should care about large classes. And I think, a lot of this may seem fairly obvious, but I think it's important to root ourselves. I think we went into the pandemic under a condition of thinking that technology was going to be the solution. And I think we've realized across the pandemic that technology is absolutely a tool. It's something that can help us achieve our learning outcomes. And it's something that ultimately has made the pandemic possible and the continuation of higher education and many of our learning environments possible. But it can't replace us. There's nothing about the technology that is going to get rid of the need for people like you and me, instructors, faculty members, students, administrators, and you name it. There is still so much about the large class that requires human intervention and human thought. And so it's important, I think, just to recognize that while we may forefront a lot of the technological capacity and possibility, that without us, the technology is meaningless. So we're not going to move into this world of AI, for example. I don't foresee AI ever sort of evolving into taking away the need for us. The second point I want to just really reinforce that we know as a truism is engagement. Engagement. Student engagement is the critical key with large classes. We all know the danger of getting up. I know from my first year of teaching where I failed spectacularly, where I privileged content and got up and just spoke at students for an hour and a half each lecture. We know we lose students so quickly. And James reinforced that with his engagement graph, where we know attention spans max out at between 10 to 20 minutes. So it's critical as we think through large classes and coming out of the pandemic that we keep engagement as a key piece of how we think about our large class environments. We also know that high impact practices continue to be critical to learning, that actually the passive receipt of information is not what students enjoy, and it's not good for student learning. We know that we need to foster student-to-student interaction. We know we need to encourage self-study and the challenge-based types of work, the problem-based scenarios and problem-based moments where students can either do it on their own or with their peers, where they can actually engage in some of the content in meaningful ways, in self-directed ways. And so we need to think really clearly again in large classes about integrating that in. And of course, that connects really nicely to the next point, which is about course design. We have to be thoughtful about our course design, and it's really important that we balance out the notions of engagement, the use of technology, with our need to engage our students through high impact practices. And of course, the last bit that why we should continue to care, because assessments. We're not ever going to be in a scenario, in my view, where we do not have assessment as a critical part of our learning environments. And of course, therefore, we need to be involved and think very carefully about assessment, how it is designed, how we might need to rethink it, and how we privilege and position student learning as an integral part of all of that. So those are sorts of the truisms that I think, continue to reinforce why we should care about large classes. But what have we learned from across the pandemic? Well, I think that there's a number of things here that, have become far more animated, have sort of enlivened themselves across the pandemic. And one of the critical pieces for me is realizing, right? And I've talked about this with lots of colleagues, it's the realization that the value proposition of higher education is more than just disciplinary content delivery, right? It's the development of a community. It's the development of the whole person. And the reason why students come to university, yes, is of course to engage in our disciplines, to move into those spaces in deeper and more meaningful ways. But it's not just about that. It's about creating connections with each other. It's about learning together. It's about becoming that whole person. So developing critical skills, as well as opportunities to experiment and to try different things in a space that is safe, that allows and enables mistakes to be made without consequence or failure to occur in a way that promotes learning. We also, I think, have learned across the pandemic that our learning environments need to place care and compassion at the heart. It's been tough for all of us. There have been various moments I know where I've been close to hitting a wall. I know that it's been stressful for a lot of you as you've pivoted online and figured out how to make your learning environments meaningful, but it's also been incredibly stressful for our students too. They've been in difficult familial situations where they've lost loved ones. We've all lost loved ones. They've been in difficult living circumstances where there's perhaps uncertainty. And of course, they deal with the general anxiety associated now with just how they're going to move forward and what are the options for the future. So care and compassion, I think, has been something that we've really learned about in this pandemic, and is something that I think I would advocate that we continue to forefront going forward. We also know that we need to think very carefully about equity, diversity, and inclusion, and accessibility needs. These have become critical tasks. And it's not that they weren't before, but I think what the pandemic has done has really shown us that the fault lines within our society, but also within higher education, do fall along racial and ethnic lines. And we need to be really very clear about that. And we need to be very honest and have honest conversations with ourselves about how our pedagogies, how our degree structures, and how our university environments are welcoming or inclusive of equity, diversity, and inclusion concerns, but also of accessibility concerns. Some of the other things that we've learned, of course, that I think may seem a bit more obvious: educational technology isn't so scary. I think one of the things that's been remarkable to me, and at Carleton, we changed learning management systems in the pandemic. We were on a Moodle-based system, which was open source. We weren't able to support it appropriately. The thing was teetering on the brink of collapse for the first 6 months of the pandemic. We shifted to a third-party supported learning management system, Brightspace, and people were able to do it. It wasn't so scary. They adapted, they adjusted, and they figured it out. And that's, I think, something that's going to be something that we've learned a lot about, is the space and place of technology, in particular educational technology. And finally, we also learned that students in their environment want flexibility. We know now, right, that students are capable of adapting to different learning spaces, and that they actually enjoy a degree of flexibility. And if I can just reflect on some of the surveys that have come out from across the pandemic that reinforce this. And we see here the Cengage's Digital Learning Pulse Survey, which polled about 1,500 faculty and students across primarily American institutions. But the reflections here, I think, are relevant for all of us. And it really was about changing in the wake of COVID-19. And what we see here is about 73% of students would prefer to take some of their courses fully online post the pandemic. 68% of students were also in favor of some combination of in-person and online courses. Roughly 2/3 of student respondents would like to use more technology and digital materials in the future. And overall, 47% of students gave the first term of 2020 an A in terms of delivery. And more than half the students, they said they felt more optimistic about online learning and the use of digital materials than they had prior to the pandemic. So there's, I think, a real watershed moment taking place here, where I'm not suggesting we all shift all our degree programs online, but where we might want to take advantage of the use of more online moments and opportunities. Of course, some of the challenges that came out of this that we need to be cognizant of really relate to stress levels, to motivation levels, and of course, to the amount of coursework. So there's some learning that we need to do with respect to online, and in particular in large classes, regarding the amount of work that we assign. I think there's been, certainly in my university, a belief that because you're not attending a face-to-face lecture in the traditional way, that there's all of a sudden a lot more time that students have to do self-directed study. And there wasn't a realization that the broadcasted lectures or the asynchronous environments took just as much time as normal lectures. So we have to think about that. But also thinking here about some additional sort of information, particularly from Top Hat, a 2020 survey, talked a lot about, once we return to campus and reopen, what would students prefer in terms of elements of online learning? You can see some of the graphs here on the right-hand side of the screen. 59% said they would like to maintain the flexibility to attend class in person. or virtually. 43% said they'd like to work with digital course materials. 75% want to maintain the ability to view lecture recordings. 38% want the ability to access things asynchronously. And 67% want learning to be active through discussion, interactive activities, and collaboration. And of course, then 79% said they also still want to acquire transferable skills like communication and collaboration. So I think we've learned what we're seeing here through these surveys and through some of the experiences that we've all maintained. We've learned quite a bit about the possibility for the online and the large class. So going back, when we go back face to face, really, we need to think very carefully about how we're going to take and consolidate some of the things that we've learned and operationalize those in our large class environments. So what does the future of large class teaching look like? Well, I can assure you it does not look like hoverboards, time machines, and VR goggles, which, funny enough, when you think about Back to the Future, I think that was Back to the Future 2, where Michael J. Fox was using those goggles. That was the precursor of VR, and now actually it is a thing. But I still don't think VR is going to be a mainstay of our learning environment. So it might be for some to play with, but what have you. But what's the future actually going to look like? Well, not to state the obvious, but blended and online learning opportunities are going to increase. And so when we think about large classes, what does this actually mean, right? We've heard some reflections today about flipped, about problem-based scenarios, right? About different ways to engage students. Do we actually, in this moment, actually imagine never meeting in a face-to-face context again for large classes? Or rather, do we think about large classes as not being a space where we go and have a lecture? Rather, we use the time together for more meaningful, high-impact practice activities like active learning or small group problem-based exercises? Do we, focus more of those face-to-face interaction moments for large classes more on the active learning type of experiences, as opposed to the big amphitheater where the sage on stage captures and uses their charisma for whatever period of time to grab the audience? I think we're going to also have to think about the future, and when considering here, about how we support each other in working through and preparing and being able to adapt to the new realities. What's been incredible for all of us, I think, is just the amount of support and attention that we've all placed into pedagogy and that our institutions have placed into supporting thoughtful pedagogy. The important piece here is not to move backwards when we move out of the pandemic. How do we actually consolidate and keep an emphasis on quality teaching learning? Obviously, meetings like this, and I look forward to seeing you all in Valencia next year. But meetings like this, I think, really matter. But we also need to maintain institutional support, right? We need those teaching and learning centers and units with educational developers, instructional designers, educational technologists to be there to help us through. Because we need, as instructors, to focus on the actual sort of course material. And not everybody has the expertise in the pedagogy. We need more flexible learning environments. Now, I heard James bemoan the notion of high flex. I hold a different view. I actually have jumped in on high flex. We're changing over about 45 of our classrooms at Carleton University to be high flex, not because I believe in the pedagogy of high flex, but because I believe in the technology and the opportunity that the flexibility of that technology brings in enabling colleagues to adopt a broader set of pedagogies. And that's going to be the critical task. A lot of our classrooms are not fit for purpose for a 21st century learning environment. And we're going to have to start thinking very clearly about the physical and that physical infrastructure, be it our learning management systems or the actual tools and technologies available to us in the physical classroom. Of course, we're going to need to pay attention to assessments and how flexible they are. And we're going to have to work through really critical problems of academic integrity and online learning. We need to pay attention, of course, to access and equity, right? And think through actually how do different groups and communities access higher education, in particular large classes, given some of the constraints that they face, be it technological, be it financial, be it social. So this is where I really want to leave off. I want us to put on our thinking caps like Doc here and think to the future. And I really appreciate the chance to come back and speak with you again. And I look forward to receiving some of your questions.